So, hello everyone. We're glad to have you here today. If you have not met Dr. Stephanie Wilson, you are missing out. She is one of the first people I connected with when I started my baby Substack ages ago last year. I mean, it feels like it was a decade ago. It feels like I've known you forever, but it's only been like a year. So she writes the Substack Freedom Over Fascism and does a wonderful podcast that I have been a guest on. And she has really interesting guests. It's a really wonderful thing. If you're not following her Substack, please subscribe. But since the election, Stephanie, you have been talking about how to talk about politics without talking about politics. So tell us what that means.
First, I want to just replay a conversation that our messaging guru, Anat Shankar-Osorio, talked about the day after the election.
Okay.
And people were like, well, what are they doing that we're not?
Right.
And one of the answers was, well, they talk about politics without talking about politics. The whole trad wives trend, whatever's going on Pinterest, movies. And I thought, well, we can do that too. We do that too. But how do we be more intentional about it? So, so for instance, the Super Bowl halftime show was talking about politics without talking about politics.
You wrote a great piece on that as well. I really enjoyed your breakdown of that.
Oh, thanks. Well, a friend of mine said, you texted and said, you should write about this. And I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I hadn't seen it. This the day after. I was like, no, I don't know anything about it. It's not really my lane. Maybe you should write about it. And then I went and looked and started to research it and watch it. And I realized it really was a great opportunity to talk about what he was trying to portray. And I don't have any illusions that hardcore Christian nationalists will hear that, but I'm hoping that people who just don't want to talk about politics will engage with other kinds of content.
Mm-hmm.
So I talk a lot about getting better at humaning.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means that you create spaces that are inclusive and give people a sense of belonging. Shameless plug, my husband and another colleague and I have a leadership course for staff in higher ed, and usually IT and libraries. And the core of it is it's empathy based. It's a series of decisions you make, and it's how you bring yourself to every conversation, to every space. That's not about politics. That's about work. That's about living. That's about humaning. Like, how can I be a better listener? How can I make people feel more included? How can I understand where they're coming from? So that's a very broad sense of talking about politics without talking about politics. Although every conversation about universities right now is talking about politics. But again, we can talk about the value of science. We can talk about the value of innovation, curiosity, and trying to find cures for cancer. And all of that is politics now, but it's also not politics. So that's kind of the first level, is talking about the things we believe in. It's about values and not about, well, I think Democrats should do this. I mean, we can talk among ourselves about what we think Democrats should be doing. And I have a lot of things to say about that. But we can also be talking about what our values are and creating in real life communities that embody those values. And then there's stuff that we can't really control, but I would like to. So, entertainment. So, go back in time to the beginning of motion pictures. And one of the first motion pictures, talkies, was Birth of the Nation.
Right.
Birth of the Nation. right? So there was this movie in the 1920s that talked about the South, the lost cause of the South, and how Civil War wasn't about slavery, and about how, white and Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that, in the guise of a movie, kind of restarted the Klan. It,
mm-hmm.
it, it restarted an entire narrative that's never been vanquished. So,
Right,
so that was very powerful. And so I'm hoping that we can get smart about what we create as entertainment,
right.
creating just movies and TV and content that reflects our values. And the other thing that I want to talk about entertainment, and I'm going to be talking about some of this on my podcast /Substack /live whatever, however we're going to do it, is the Western. John Wayne. That was
Yeah.
a very intentional portrayal of American manhood, of the rugged individual, of a white West.
Mm-hmm.
And that started an obsession with Westerns that were all about this white, lone, powerful guy, where that wasn't reality, but
Right.
it changed the perspective, or it reinforced the perspective that um, you know reactionaries, whatever we want to call them, wanted to portray,
Mm-hmm.
which is a narrative that isn't history. It's just a narrative and a myth, but it was reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and not in a way that was like lecturing. So that's
And
what.
it appealed to certain demographics who maybe felt inferior or saw a way to identify with that and feel good about themselves. And so, that version of masculinity, when you don't feel very masculine, can be a nice cloak to put on to assume.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do that.
They
I mean,
did.
I see the same kinds of themes in Tom Cruise movies.
Yes.
So what, he's the lone wolf, he's the one who defies everybody, he's the one who breaks all the rules but still ends up on top. It's the same kind of persona, I think, as the John Wayne movies.
It is. It absolutely is. So if those sort of action movies can be switched to a theme of everyone having each other's back
Mm-hmm.
and not about being the lone wolf,
Mm-hmm.
think about what that could portray. The idea that we're all here for each other. We're all um, in a community that lifts each other up, and not that just breaks you know, just goes in and breaks things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And has to be bailed out, or there's this, the original Top Gun with Val Kilmer, and like you could be my wingman anytime, and
Yeah.
I can quote Top Gun far too well, um, but uh, imagine if we could have a a critical mass of entertainment that that focuses on the values that we want to live, right? Not sure that the hardcore Christian nationalists /MAGA /reactionaries /Nazis will watch those things. But I think middle of the road people who are just watching entertainment will.
Yeah, I mean, that's who it has to be targeted toward. I don't know if I've ever said this before anywhere, but I wasn't allowed to go to movies when I was a child in Christian nationalism. So I couldn't even see Disney movies because I might be standing in line to see the Shaggy DA, and someone might think I was going to see The Exorcist, even though I was only like 6, and so I was not allowed to go to the movie. So, and that's pretty commonplace in that world, which is one reason why creating Christian movies like Kirk Cameron does, or somebody like that, they'll support those movies and they'll bring them to their churches, or give people dispensations to go see them, but they won't let you go see a secular movie
Well,
in
that's
the theater.
exactly what I'm
So
talking about, though. So,
yeah, so but
I,
it's
you know,
right. So, we would be doing the same thing, but trying to attract different groups of people who aren't Christian nationalists, most likely to see them.
right. And also,
So,
everything's online now. So, you don't necessarily have to advertise what you're watching when you watch it. Like, so maybe somebody in that community, they can find whatever they want. Just as last week, I talked to a scholar, Craig Johnson, about how young men, boys, to 10 to 25 get sucked into fascism online very, very quickly.
and the
Um,
pandemic didn't help with that.
I'm sorry.
The pandemic didn't help with that.
Oh, the
Probably
pandemic
supercharged that.
supercharged that.
Yeah.
Um, and so they went down that rabbit hole. But what if there were more things online that have nothing to do with politics that are, um, reinforcing our values? I know my son is really into watching Minecraft as kind of a spectator sport, and he follows a bunch of creators, and a lot of them just kind of slip things in about
Mm-hmm.
being inclusive and being welcoming, and that's what we need to be doing more of. um if any, I don't know if any, I don't know what the audience for Wicked is, but I've been kind of watching it a little bit nonstop. But that's the exact value, those are the values that we want to communicate. And that's not talking about politics at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, I was talking to my husband before I got on with you, and I mean, I said to him, I'm just so blunt and direct. This is not something that I would ever be very good at. I can't talk about things indirectly. I'm just going to tell you what I think. But there are plenty of people who aren't like that, who this would be really good for. And he said, one of the things that I think most Americans value is being able to plan for the future and know that in the future they will be taken care of because of the plans they have today. And so many of those things are being attacked right now. So, but then when I try to think about, well, how would you talk about that without talking about politics? I have no idea. So it's hard for me. To me, it feels like it needs some really big advertising person or marketing person to come in and determine what these values are
but
that you
really,
can
you
drill
know
down
what your
to.
values are. You
I
know that
know what
your
my
values.
values are, but if I were going to do some kind of podcast to display those values, I would want to talk about traveling and meeting people who are different from me and interviewing those different people, and talking about how we're the same but we're different and what we garnered from each other that helped us understand each other better. But then I
Exactly.
was like, but that just comes across as I'm a pompous asshole who's talking down to people about how much I travel. And that's what people will take away from it.
Well,
But
no,
that was,
I mean, it's about curiosity. It's about opening your mind to seeing different perspectives. And I think we need more reinforcement of that, because even people who share our values don't want to talk about politics all the time. But if they could,
yeah.
like, go hear about other people's perspectives, like how many people, I'm not on Facebook much anymore, but there were like Humans of New York, right? Where they would have a little story about people who lived in New York. You don't even need to leave you don't even need to travel to find people in different kinds of lives. And I think people would find it really interesting. And you don't have to say a word about Democrats or Republicans or Trump. You just have to, like, you know, show your curiosity, show the idea that you value people, show the idea that immigrants are really exciting, fresh ideas and food and dance and music, right? As opposed to immigrants are all criminals. Well, no, like
Well, and
they bring a lot
especially
of
I
good stuff.
chafe at that now because I am an immigrant. So it's, yeah, I call myself that to try to destigmatize that word
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, so when somebody sees my profile, I'm a proud immigrant. I'm happy to be an immigrant. So there's nothing wrong with being an immigrant. That's one way I try to change the conversation. But of course, I'm a lily white person, so it's different for me when I do that than it would be for someone who's a person of color or a minority using that same word, perhaps. But I
True.
don't know.
But, there are so many different pieces of content out there, so many that it's impossible to even know about them, where people are just talking to people who have been through a thing. Shannon Watts, the
Yeah.
woman who started um, Moms Demand Action, she's talking about menopause now.
Mm-hmm.
Her book is about, like, how women's health has been completely
Ignored.
ignored, right?
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, nobody talks about it. And every woman goes through it. And that's, like, brilliant because nobody has a clue. Nobody tells you anything. Nobody, like, a friend of mine recommended this book called What Fresh Hell Is This? Which is, like,
And any menopausal woman or woman who's gone through that just laughed.
right, because we know, but nobody tells anybody else, right? So she's coming at it through a different lens. Amanda Littman has a book coming out talking about leadership in Gen Z. That's not talking about having people run for office, which she also does. It's talking about it in a different way. So maybe it'll reach more people. Maybe it'll just give people a different way to think about how we talk about our lives. Um, there are just so many ways that we don't realize are communicating our values where we don't have to use a political lens at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's leadership. It's curiosity. It's
Building
inclusion.
trust and connection, as Mary Noon says in the comments. It's that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Mary. Hi, Mary.
Some of
um,
you may have greater ideas than I have or than Stephanie has about how to talk about politics without talking about politics. Um, because I really struggle with it. She says hi if you don't see that. Mary
I
says
see
hi
now. She has a great
with a
Substack
smile.
called uh Barry, what is it called? I forget. Uh but look
She
at
tagged me. She tagged me yesterday, and I wrote a response today that I'm sorry if it was kind of grouchy. 92 County Plan is the name of Mary's Substack.
All right. So
So,
especially if you are in a red state, super important read.
okay.
All right. That's my plug for Mary. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, most of us know what our values are. I have a theory that we should stop, like, the second we talk in the language of the other side, we've lost a conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
they're like, DEI this, DEI this. The second we use the words DEI, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost. We're on their territory. What if we start calling what we know as DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? What if we just talk about it as meritocracy, right? Because that's what we're saying, is that we just want people who are qualified to be in the pool. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
we have to find a way to talk about um, what our values are on our terms
Mm-hmm.
and not on their terms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we need to, and I particularly am not great at this, create offline communities where we're together and we're, you know, helping each other, and we're living the values of sort of mutual support and mutual aid. So
It's funny for me. I don't talk about my work a lot where I live. My friends are kind of divorced from that, but then a few of them started following it, and so now they'll talk about politics with me. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that here. I do that all the time. And so some of them will even bring it up to me when they won't talk about it with anybody else. So, it would be lovely to find ways to share my values that aren't talking about politics in the ways that people try to do that to me now. Woody says, I find that using the words of Jesus are effective in countering Christian nationalists. Um, that has not been my experience, Woody. I think they think Jesus was a wimp, and will say that. So,
and that also
um,
leaves out non-Christians entirely.
right. I mean,
So
Stephanie is Jewish and is a practicing Jew. So, and there really isn't, that I know of, a Christian nationalist strain of Jews. So, even though there are certainly radicalized factions within Judaism, just
yeah,
like there are in any other
exactly.
religious faith modality. Woody's Jewish also, but I don't think you are a
I would be,
practicing Jew anymore. Are you? I don't think
well,
you are.
I don't know. I practice. I mean, it's all. I
I don't think.
actually, I tell people I'm a bad Jew. It's different than Christianity. It's an identity just as much as it is action or belonging to a synagogue, or
Right.
um, it's a very different beast than Christianity.
Yeah.
I found uh, Ancestry.com discovered a secret cousin of mine who had no idea that my uncle was her biological father until Ancestry brought that up.
Oh, that's happened a lot, I think,
I think it
because of sites like that.
and she's Christian, and thank goodness, kind of on, the inclusion side, she's a
Hmm.
theater teacher, middle
Hmm.
school theater teacher. So like that's where inclusion happens, is in theater. Um, and we've been talking for years about how could she get in touch with her Jewish roots, and it's for her, it's through a Christian lens. So she's like, well, I think so. Why is it that um, there are so many Jews who are creators or write music or musical theater? And then she, likened it to theology, but
Hmm.
most Jews like theology, like most, particularly American, but like liberal Jews, God isn't so much part of the conversation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's just different ways of looking at the world. And there's a lot to say, and I've been trying to say it about what's going on now between anti Semitism and the disappearing of the Columbia student who was certainly not interested in my continued existence, but I'm interested in his,
Hmm.
right? Anyway, that's a
Okay.
different story. But everybody go read Tim Snyder's The Anti-Semitism in the Oval Office. It is jaw-dropping, eye-opening. Um, it completely took me by surprise, and it is uh, so important a lens to look at what's going on with Ukraine.
I wonder, and I don't know if these things exist because I'm not a big watcher of podcasts. I don't have much social media anymore. But I wonder if there would be a way to portray those values in a sports show or where dudes sit around talking about sports, but from the lens of this guy's really a great person in sport because he did this uplifting, humane thing that we value instead of he scored a goal or he ran the fastest or he, I don't know if anything like that exists or if it would
Ted
even
Lasso.
appeal to anyone. But
Ted Lasso.
okay.
Amazing. If you haven't watched it,
Mm-hmm.
it's all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have any gotchas. It doesn't like twist to become sort of like alpha male sport thing. It has all of those. It's about leadership. It's about being there for each other. It's everything we want, but that's one thing, right?
Do you have some kind of cheat sheet of things like Ted Lasso that you think are doing this talking about politics or talking about our values
That is something I
without making it political? Because if you put something like that together, it would help me think of more and probably people here think about more things like that or think of ways we could incorporate that into our conversations with people more and so forth. Um, because I just really struggle with it again, because I'm just a super blunt and direct person and just say what I think all the time and don't really think about how to approach different people. I just bludgeon people and they come
although
back to me or not.
do you I mean you live your values, which is
I do,
curiosity.
which is to just be very blunt and direct and honest with people, and they like it or they don't. But
Right, but the other values you live by, right? That you're there for your friends, that you are curious about the world, that
yeah,
you um, are in, you lead with empathy. Whether you talk about it in politics or not, that's talking about politics without talking about politics. You're already doing it. But
somebody
the whole
says
cheat sheet I hadn't thought about, and I will attempt to put something together.
now it's a very good idea, and I know those kinds of things are time consuming. Somebody has asked me to make a dictionary of Christian nationalist terms and language so that people can, and I still haven't had time to do that. And then Ann Applebaum the other day said, "Oh, well, you could add like autocratic terms to that too." And I'm like, "That's not even my bailiwick." But she's like, "But you could do that too." So,
Did you want to say, and so could you?
well, yeah, I mean, she's got a lot more to do right now than I do, but it did make me think that having a cheat sheet of the kinds of things, giving us some examples of what you think are pieces of entertainment or podcasts or things on YouTube or,
Mhm.
influencers who are doing these things really well in a progressive way, but not overtly so.
Right.
But
I
they're
will, yeah,
communicating those values. I would love to see a list like that.
I will, I will get going on it. It will no way be comprehensive because I'm not that connected,
Well,
but
but
that's what people can add to it. That's what happened with
right.
the list I put together of people to follow, for fact-based, values-based news.
And
And
you got a lot of ads to that. And so it gets people thinking, and people's brains work differently. And I bet we'd come up with a pretty good catalog of things to use to fuel our own ideas about how to do this.
right.
Because that's part of it. I would like to watch things or listen to things that help me go, oh, here's one way I could do that.
Hmm.
Either I'd have to start a different Substack because I talk about politics all the time on my Substack, but you know, to learn different tactics for having conversations and talking about things would be really valuable. Mary says also a list of works or signals that the right uses that we don't know, words or signals that the right uses that we don't know means something we completely don't know, which I mean, I've done that with Christian nationalist words for over a year now.
I could do, so, who was it? Somebody wrote on Blue Sky, they were quoting somebody else who was talking about Trump's economic thing, and um, and decrying the globalist economic system.
Mm.
That means Jews are controlling all of the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you, like, people don't know that because
And amongst
would.
themselves, they would say that. But then when they say it out in the world, they don't say that. They just say this globalist thing is bad,
Well,
but that's what it means.
or they know, like, if they use the word, I mean, it's been a trope for hundreds of years. Jews are globalist or cosmopolitan. Those sorts of words mean Jew.
Mm-hmm.
New York sense of
Bad Jew.
humor.
Yeah.
New York sense of humor means Jew. New York values means Jew. And it's larger than that. And I have really tried to stay away from talking about the Middle East and what's going on and about anti-Semitism that much. But right now, shit's getting real, and the administration is using anti-Semitism as a fig leaf for fascism, and it's totally complicated and indirect, and it never ends well.
And all while claiming to care about Jews.
Right, but while completely decimating
Right.
Zelensky in the Oval Office
Right. Right.
based on, very old anti-Jewish tropes. So
Right.
yeah, it's very confuddling, confusing.
Does anybody here have an idea for a way to talk about politics without talking about politics that we haven't hit on? Because I'd be interested in your ideas as well, if any of you have any. There are quite a few of you here, and I see your names pop up and want to say hey to every one of you. And then, of course, you go so fast, it's hard to keep
I
up.
know it scrolls
So,
up and you can barely read the comments. So
well, and it's hard because it covers your face if there get to be too many of them. And so this is scrolling over your face. So Substack Live, I know people like it and it is easy to use within Substack, but it's harder to me to do a talk on it because of all this other stuff happening. I'm
right.
not a good multitasker. I think I say that every single time I do one of these. And so
I'm not
I
either.
struggle to read and try to think of answers and pay attention to what people are saying. So Deidre Keller says, I'm thinking about talking about, well, let's see, talking about a book can be a good way to do this for those of us who love books.
Yes.
And so one of the things, and one of my subscribers said this in my last live session that I just did on my own. Her mother is MAGA. And so she's been picking contemporary women's fiction books that have these kinds of progressive themes in them, but aren't so overt, and reading them with her mother, and then they've been talking about them. So this month's book in my democracy reading group is one of those kinds of books, Take Your Medicine by Pamela Crane. And so it's set in 1970 and shows really how far women have come since 1970 by putting her in the workforce, the protagonist in the workforce in 1970, and trying to make a difference. And so I enjoyed reading that book so much because it didn't talk about politics at all,
Mm-mm.
but it still wove a really interesting picture of what I value and why I value it. So books, Deidre, is a really, really good idea. So
Something about despise Netanyahu, Smotrich, and those like them that are radically Zionist, but I am not an anti-Semite. You can hate the government without denying Israel's right to exist as a country. I,
right.
I'm not. I'm not a supporter of any of those guys. I think they're horrible and fascist.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that. So, at its core, Zionism really means Israel has a right to exist. That's it. No more. Everything else is politics. So when people say they hate that Zionists are bad or whatever, they're conflating Zionists. They're using the word Zionist to mean all Jews, because most of us believe that Israel has a right to exist as a country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, most of us also believe that Palestine has a right to exist as a country.
Mm-hmm.
But the language of it is very divisive and hateful.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you can absolutely disagree with the Israeli government, 100%, but
And I
still think it
absolutely do. And a lot of people absolutely do. But that doesn't mean that I don't want Israel to exist and
right.
think all Jews are terrible and all that kind of stuff. That's, I think the government right now there is terrible.
And I think most Israelis would actually agree with you. I can only see a little bit. No, I can't scroll. Something, the story, Zionist has come to mean that Israel has a right to take all of the land. Actually, I'm sorry to disagree with you.
I don't see that. Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm trying to share. Am I only? You're seeing comments on yours, and I'm maybe seeing comments on mine.
Well,
Trying to.
Mary's saying, as a former history teacher, biographies or real life stories can be good for discussion. I mean, we're reading in my Democracy Book Club, we're reading Alexei Navalny's memoir for
Mhm.
our December read this year, which may be too political, but I agree that biographies and memoir can be a good way to step in someone else's shoes, which is part of what building empathy is about, and why I think entertainment of all kinds, but books especially, and fiction even more especially,
Right.
helps us do that. It helps us step into other people's shoes and see the world from a different perspective. I mean, another thing that I could talk about if I wanted to have Substacks where I just talk about random things is I have a lot of friends who are artists. And as a
Oh
writer,
yes, yes,
I don't
art.
I don't like to go to residencies and hang out with a bunch of writers. I think writers are boring. I don't want to be around writers talking about writing all the time. So I prefer to go to residencies with artists because I'll hang out with them and ask them why they look at something a particular way, or why did you draw that this way, or why did you paint it that way, or why did you frame the camera that way to take that picture, or what do you think of this view here? Should I stand here or should I? And it's so interesting to just get them to tell me how they see the world and get them to make me stand where they stand or look at it the way they do, and how much of a difference it makes in how I see the world. And so I feel like all of these experiences are encouraging people to do that. And people on the right won't do that. Um, Having come from that world, my my parents, for example, don't want to be around anything that challenges them. So we're really looking for people who are open to those kinds of experiences, who aren't indoctrinated in some sort of cult.
Right. Um, I think art and image is incredibly powerful. And oh, come on, we're not talking about that right now. Sorry. Um, Art is really a very powerful medium to talk about the way that you feel.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I don't know how I structure a Substack or a podcast to do that, but maybe somebody here would have a good idea. I mean, I know so many people in that world, and they're always interesting, and they always have random, very surprising perspectives that make me think, and not always make me go, "Oh, I'm always thinking correctly." I mean, every time I talk to you, I see a new way to see Jewish people and to break down my own preconceived notions of what that means. And so that's valuable to me. So I love it when you talk about that. So it helps me see the world I think, more productively and more humanely. So,
One of the things that you could do is have artist conversations. Just have
yeah,
conversations with people you know about, I
yeah.
don't know what, but like, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry that I reacted the way I did to the person who's talking about Israeli politics. That is Israeli politics. And once again, if you weren't here for it, you can be a not supporter. You can abhor everything that the Israeli government does and still think that Israel has a right to exist. And that's all I want to say about that right now.
Okay. Does anybody have any other ideas about how to talk about politics without talking about politics? Because we've been going for about 45 minutes now, and I don't want to take up your whole day with this topic, but I hope it's given a lot of us some things to think about in terms of how we approach conversations in our communities, how we interact with people at work or in other places that we go, what kinds of entertainment we choose to watch and promote. I mean, I went and saw Lee Miller, the movie about the photographer, the World War II photographer, the other night. And I mean, that movie didn't feel at all political, though I'm sure people would make it that. But, that's an example of something that I tell people to go see right now
Right.
as a means of seeing the world
I think
differently.
talking about those things as you encounter them. I mean,
Yeah.
me too. I'm late to the Wicked game, but
I
it's
still haven't
amazing.
seen it because I'll have to go by myself. My husband refuses to go to musicals and can't stand them. So I
Well,
love them.
I don't know if you can get Amazon Prime there, and I know
I won't do
I'm
it on
not gonna.
Amazon Prime.
You won't
But
go
at
on
some
Amazon Prime.
point, I will stream it in some format that I don't have to pay some horrible person or company to watch it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
I
it'd be
really appreciate everybody coming today. This is a great turnout for this special Substack Live. I appreciate, you know, it's hard right now to know how to pay for anything. There's so much uncertainty. I appreciate every single one of you who supports this work with money or with telling enough people about it to be here to earn paid status. I don't really know who does what. I don't care. I just value everybody um, who cares enough about independent media to support it. Because one of the reasons we are where we are is because we haven't done that
here,
for a
here.
long time. So I hope you'll continue to do that. I hope you'll check out Stephanie's Substack, Freedom Over Fascism. Go listen to some of her prior podcasts. She's a great interviewer as well as interviewee. So you'll enjoy getting to know her better there. And I'll look forward to talking to you soon, Stephanie, and to
Yes.
seeing the rest of you on my Substack.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And for anyone, I'm going to put this up as a podcast on
Okay.
my Substack and in the podcast universe,
Okay.
making it very clear that this is Andra interviewing me.
Okay.
Um, but if you want to share that around too, once I get it up, that would be great.
I will absolutely do that. It's always so lovely to see you. I'm so glad that we kind of dressed similarly in power colors today without coordinating that at all.
Do you know how many people I have interviewed where we've shown up in the same outfit? And
Oh,
one of us,
really?
yeah, well, it's actually just one person, but every time we talked, we showed up in the same outfit.
You're
Um,
like twins from, who
yeah,
knows? You share a brain somehow. That's
somehow.
interesting. Okay. Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Thank
And
you.
I'll see everybody soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.